Hello, and welcome to Obliterate the Construct. This is part one of a two-part interview with Mitch, and hopefully the last one where I'm rolling solo without my wonderful co-host, Butaina. Please hit those subscribe and like buttons on YouTube. We're still a new show and need your help working that algorithm to help get us in front of a wider audience, and turn on alerts or notifications to keep up with our current releases. If you're listening on other platforms, your ratings go a long way to helping us expand our reach there as well. We also love receiving your comments and questions on these platforms or on our socials, so please send those our way. If you'd like to support this independent show financially and join the community that we're developing, please sign up on our Patreon at the link in the description, where we have a $5 per month supporter tier as well as a free option, and follow us on our socials. Thanks for listening and enjoy.
I had picked up a penny off the ground and I was placed into my car seat. I remember just looking at it and I just started to bend it and it completely bent into like a little half penny. Like if you could imagine bending a penny 90 degrees. And then my mom like turns around and she's in the passenger seat of the car and she's like, "Where did you get that?" And I handed it to her and she takes it and looks at it and she's like, she looks at the person who's driving and is like, "Have you ever seen a penny like this?" And they're like, "No, I've never seen a penny bent like that." And I was like, "I did it." And my mom is just in shock. Like, "What are you talking about? How did, no, you did this, just stop." And I'm like, no, I did that. The voice tells me to reach my hand into the fire. It tells me that it's going to be okay and that I'm not going to get hurt. I remember putting my hand into the fire, my mom immediately screaming, being lifted and pulled away from the fire, and her going like, oh my God, are you okay?" And then I'm looking at my hand and she's looking at me and I'm fine and I'm not burned at all. That's the first time I actually remember ever hearing a voice. I had a stuffed animal set up in a perfect circle around me on my bed, almost like we're having a group discussion. And she's like, "Who are you talking to?" And I look at her and I go, "My friend." These stuffed animals were not toys that I played with. These stuffed animals were decorative and they were on a desk and hutch, which was like taller than the one that's right next to me right here. And as a 3-year-old, she didn't leave a chair in there because she didn't want me to ever try and climb up there. So the next question she asked me is like, "How did you get these?" My friends helped me.
Hello, and welcome to Obliterate the Construct. I'm here today with a friend of mine, Mitch, and he is a lifelong experiencer whose journey into the unknown began at the age of 2. From early encounters with poltergeist activity to witnessing a non-human entity walking among us, Mitch has spent a lifetime navigating the strange and unexplained. As a teenager, their curiosity led them into the occult, bringing both insight and anomalous health incidents that deepened their understanding of unseen forces. Today, their experiences have evolved into profound interactions with higher density beings, past life connections, and a deeper exploration of consciousness, reality shifts, and the metaphysical mechanics of our universe. With a blend of personal encounters, esoteric study, and a grounded perspective, Mitch brings a unique lens to the mysteries that shape our existence. So, hello, Mitch, and welcome. Glad to have you here.
Hey, Anthony. Thank you. Thank you. I
Of
appreciate it.
course.
Happy to be here.
So we got a lot to get into. This will be split up into two parts, and because as your intro reads, there's a lot to cover. You've been experiencing things since you were a little kid, and I'd love to hear about how this got started and how you've kind of. I know it's not going to follow necessarily a linear path in your evolution to where you are today, and that's totally fine. But please let us know how this all started for you.
Yeah. Feel free to interrupt me anytime if you have questions. But I guess to kind of take it from the top, to your point, I have been experiencing things ever since I was a little kid. Some of my first memories in childhood were kind of foundational to the exploratory nature of how I engaged with the topic for the remaining years of my life. But I think all of them really kind of set the tone for me to view the world from a very specific lens of never really thinking that we truly understood everything that we ever really thought we did. And going all the way back to the age of 2 was a really great place to start. That's when some of the first experiences I had really started to pick up, and the ones that I really started to remember happened really around the age of 3. But I remember the earliest experience that kicked off was at the age of 2. This memory was not really my own. It's one of the first that my mom actually shared with me. But this memory was of me walking into, and I had kind of just learned to talk and I was just speaking. And I described a man in my room, in my bedroom, in military fatigue. And the fact that I could even describe that and I knew some of the terminology associated with like the type of outfit that he would have been wearing was a little strange to her. We grew up in a military family. My father was in the Air Force. I was born on a military base, if that gives any background, but I hadn't really been exposed to that, and so it was really interesting that I was seeing something that early on. But
Mm.
it wasn't atypical in my mom's side of the family for anyone on that side of the family to have experiences and have those experiences from a very early age.
You said it was not atypical for them to have that?
No,
Oh.
my mom's side of the family is very, very filled with stories similar to my own. We're very, very fractionally Cherokee Indian, so I say that with some degree of hesitancy, just because it was my great great grandmother who actually was more Cherokee, and so it just got, you know, higher up the chain from there is where we got closer to our actual ancestral heritage on that side. But further down, very diluted. So I say that with some hesitancy.
Cool, okay. So, what how did your mom take that experience initially?
I guess for her, she kind of just assumed that it meant that things were going to be the same for me as it kind of was for the rest of the family. Like I was probably going to experience things. She always had an open mind to this topic, and so things really started to escalate within the next year. I remember that one of the first experiences that I had after that that I remember vividly was being in a parking lot and we were getting into the car. I had picked up a penny off the ground at this time and I was placed into my car seat, still holding on to this penny. And I remember just looking at it and I just started to bend it and it completely bent into like a little half penny. Like if you could imagine bending a penny 90 degrees. And I was just sitting there looking at it. And then my mom like turns around and she's in the passenger seat of the car and she's like, "Where did you get that?" And I handed it to her and she takes it and looks at it and she's like, she looks at the person who's driving and is like, "Have you ever seen a penny like this?" And they're like, "No, I've never seen a penny bent like that." And I was like, "I did it." And my mom is just in shock, like, "What are you talking about? How did, no, you didn't, just stop." And I'm like, "No, no, I did that." And that was an interesting experience, one of the first that I actually vividly remember, because for many years as I was growing up, I always kept trying to bend pennies again, and for some reason it would never work. And I was like, how did this happen that one time? So yeah, that was one of the first experiences that kind of caused me to start viewing the world in a very different way. I was like, maybe things aren't always exactly as we think it's supposed to be.
Mhm.
And then that escalated pretty quickly because as we were out one day. I don't know if you liked to do this, but when I was a kid, when I was little, I would like to get underneath a shopping cart when my mom would push it around because like I don't know why, I just liked the feeling of riding along. And so it made the shopping experiences, whether
Yeah.
it was a grocery store or department store, just kind of fly by. And I felt like I was in my own little craft, right? And so my mom is kind of in a department store. She's shopping for clothes for my little brother who hadn't been born yet. So I had a feeling we were in some kind of like a baby Zara R Us or a TJ Maxx. And
And
she's
how old were
pushing
you
the,
around this time?
I was around 3.5 at this
Okay.
time. So she's pushing the cart around. And I remember turning around and looking behind us, and I see a cart being pushed, but where the cart handle is, and then going around like the side of the plastic cart itself were three very long tendril-like fingers on both sides. So kind of like hugging the entire cart. And I look up and I see this this very large ovular head, huge stereotypical black eyes, very two like little slit for a nose, there's a slit for a mouth, and the entire the skin of this creature kind of looked like the way that if you looked at the topography of a desert, it's all dry and kind of cracked and stuff like that. Like that's kind of what this looked like. And then the fingers themselves were a bit more. tendril like in the sense that they were very thick right at the hand, and then they got thinner and thinner as you'd get to the
Mm.
very end where it was more pointed. And I just remember seeing three of these long fingers, and I started screaming. I like absolutely start screaming. I'm crying. I'm like hysterical. And when my mom turns around and looks at this person, she immediately is just like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," and is apologizing and looks back at me and it's like, "It's not polite to stare. Calm down, calm down." And I'm just in shock because I have no idea why she's not seeing what I'm seeing, and I'm terrified because I've never experienced anything like this before. I don't think at this time in my life I've been exposed to movies or film or TV or anything like that, especially as it pertains to trying to come up with some kind of an imagination or imaginatory like version of what this could be.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was kind of shocking. That was a really intense experience for me.
Wow. And was so is this a memory that's pretty vivid for you, or is this something that your mom has since told you about happened to
No,
you?
so she doesn't remember this story. I actually remember this. And the reason I remember that it's something I experienced that wasn't a dream, and that's, there are prosaic explanations. Like maybe it was just a dream. Maybe you imagined it. Maybe you looked at somebody who was disfigured and you just had an overactive imagination and it was just somebody
Mm.
who, and I take those as plausible explanations. But the thing that makes it really stand out for me is that I kept that as a core memory growing up every single year. I didn't forget it. It was burned into my mind, and every year I would constantly remind myself of this experience and the story because I'd want to figure out what happened. And so as I got older and I had access to a library through school and I'm reading about aliens and extraterrestrials, and I'm like, okay, this is a match now. Now I actually have some exposure to something that goes back to the experience that I had that I can tie to it, and that's what sticks with me is now from that moment I don't really forget that. I can still see it vividly in my head today.
That's I mean, yeah, that's impressive, and that suggests that it had some sort of, like, traumatic shock impact on you at that age for it to
Yeah.
stick that long. Wow.
A lot of these memories are definitely tied to it being a kind of a traumatic experience. So, when I think about this entity in particular, I never found a comparison or never even looked for a comparison online of trying to figure out like what type of entity this was, what type of being this could have been. It just was a memory that I had carried with me for a really long time. But flash forward to very recently, and I'm sure many people watching this are familiar with the Nazca mummies and the situation with the triangles that popped up in 2023. I had been following that topic, but it didn't really click to me until recently when one of the newly released photos of one of the adult forms blew me away because here we have these mummified remains and they have three very, very long fingers that are about the equivalent size that if you would imagine them wrapped around a grocery cart like the one that I saw, it's identical to that kind of a being. The head
Wow.
structure, the shape, the eyes, everything was like a one-to-one match of what I experienced back then.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
wild.
yeah, yeah.
Did
It
that
still get
change
really.
did that change or, impact the way you look back on that memory?
I mean, there was a babysitter I had once when I was probably around 8 years old. I brought this story up to, and I don't know why I felt compelled to talk to her. I always like talking to about supernatural things with babysitters because I was so into it at that time. But she like looked at me and was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," and then immediately tells me, children have the ability to kind of see, and it's very, that's a very cliche thing to say, like children see things that adults don't see. But it's interesting. Like I've been doing a lot of recent research. I've been looking into things like the raw material. I've actually turned myself on to Dolores canon literature, specifically the convoluted universe, and I'm in volume one, and it gets into this conversation about how there were entities that settled in areas of South America that would actually be considered shapeshifters, and they would have an ability to appear as whatever they wanted to the observer, and they constantly did this as a way of communicating with the tribes of that time to help elevate their consciousness. And so they would show up as mythical creatures. You always hear stories of like the eagle or the tiger, and the person has this dream, and then they have this vision, and it's usually accompanied with some kind of an idea that they need to move locations or they need to follow this particular creature that way or whatever. And it's
Yeah.
always something like that. And it's very interesting that that's where these remains are being found, and that these beings had implants, and that there's potential, and this is just a theory, but like maybe those implants are actually the device or technology used to mask their appearance to certain people. And in the raw material, they talk about how in order to kind of see through illusions and things like that kind of technology, it takes an unadulterated mind. So somebody who's free of distortion. And I could imagine children in today's day and age, or children in general, are probably the most free and pure versions of a human being to exist, that haven't been indoctrinated by society, that haven't committed sin or
Yeah.
had any like lower level consciousness behaviors or thoughts or patterns, if they're lucky,
Yeah.
obviously. But you know, like maybe that's it. Maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Yeah, and for those not familiar, the raw material is this channeled material that started in the early 1980s, and I believe it's still. I believe there's groups still claiming to channel that entity or the hive mind today. But very fascinating stuff in there, and definite connections to everything we're discussing.
Yeah, it doesn't really slow down from there. So I would say flash forward to the next year of my life. This is still around the age of three and a half. Like I said, my little brother hadn't been born yet. And we lived in a very, very rural community. I think population was less than 2,000 people. And at this time, it was also the site of a pretty intense battleground in both the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. So both of both of those left a big impact on this community. So we're like really in the middle of nowhere. My father at the time, now he's my stepfather. Um, he's the sheriff, so he's out on patrol late at nights, and sometimes it's not at the house. And so my mom used to have all of these kinds of weird experiences where sometimes she said she would hear voices, kind of whispers and things through the hall. And so it was really, from her perspective, things were always a little bit strange and she never felt comfortable in the house. From my perspective, things were definitely strange. And I never felt comfortable in that house. And there are just small examples would be I would get a toy from as a gift in the mail or something, and it would be a doll. And I would just feel like something other than the doll was in that doll. The eyes would follow me around, kind of a thing. And as a child with an imagination who's gone through all of this, obviously, this all could have been in my own head. But it didn't really stop there. And one of the things that happened to me that my mom was terrified of was a night that we were all sitting in the living room, and there was a fire going in the fireplace, and I started to hear really, really sweet, kind voice telling me to walk towards the fireplace. And as I got closer to the fire, my mom is engaged in conversation with one of her friends who's visiting at the time, and it's just the three of us in there. And the friend is kind of looking at me. My mom is not paying attention because she's telling a story, and so they're just kind of caught up. And the voice tells me to reach my hand into the fire. It tells me that it's going to be okay and that I'm not going to get hurt. And so I do. And I reach my hand in. And my memory is kind of hazy here, but I remember putting my hand into the fire, my mom immediately screaming, being lifted and pulled away from the fire, and her going like, oh my God, are you okay? And then I'm looking at my hand and she's looking at me and I'm fine and I'm not burned at all. And that was kind of crazy because that's the first time I actually remember ever hearing a voice out like at all. And of course, it's not common that that has happened. I mean, very few times in my life, even though I'm an experiencer of some of these different types of phenomena, has a voice been present.
Mm,
Um, so that was something I never forgot, because what I take away from that again is more of a challenge to our concept of reality, a challenge to this notion that like everything is exactly as we always think that it is. Because I remember feeling like I put it in, and whether that happened or not, that was my takeaway, which caused me to have this kind of a framework in my mind of always questioning the philosophy of nature and reality in and of itself.
yeah.
So
Yeah, so you mentioned things seem to pick up in that house. Were they? And you also earlier you mentioned that your family had a history of experiences themselves as well. Do you know if they noticed a difference from things they were experiencing before and then after moving into this house, and how that could have changed?
I would say that there was more going on in this house than previously. The only experience that I know of that my mom has referred to was the one of me seeing and describing a man who was always in my room with me, the guy that I told you about earlier. So that's really the first thing that happened. And then the second thing that happened started in this house. So this house specifically was kind of like the accelerator for us. Um,
Did they have experiences before you were born?
oh yes, yeah, my mom definitely. She's had experiences with ghosts and seeing things, dreams, visions, downloads, things of that nature.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, she's a lot like me. We've even I know that there are people who actually try and research the connection between, parent and child who are both experiencers, especially when there's overlap. And sometimes my mom and I have had like dreams where we both wake up the next day and we're like, yo, did you have a crazy dream last night? And she comes back to me and is like, oh my God, it was this? Yep, me too. And
Mhm.
we've had like similar dreams.
And do you know if for her this new house kind of was this shift to a more ramped up version of these experiences for her as well?
Outside of what I'm going to talk about happening to us in the house, I don't know. I've never asked her if she was having any other types of experiences or phenomena occur
Okay.
personally, because what I'm about to tell you was sort of happening to both of us anyway.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that kind of segues nicely into the next story, which is my mom would sometimes hear me talking to myself at night. Like, and as a 3 year old, being awake at around 11 or 12 is not really common. So there was one night that she heard me speaking and had no idea what I was saying. And she opened the door to my room. And in the room, I had a stuffed animal set up in a perfect circle around me on my bed. So I'm kind of sitting here in the center and they're around me almost like we're having like a group discussion. And she's like, who are you talking to? And I look at her and I go, my friend. And the next question is the one that really startled her. And the biggest reason she was concerned in this moment wasn't that I was a kid sitting around hanging out with my stuffed animals. It was that these stuffed animals were not toys that I played with. These stuffed animals were decorative and they were on a desk and hutch, which was like a, taller than the one that's right next to me right here. And as a 3 year old, she didn't leave a chair in there because she didn't want me to ever try and climb up there. So the biggest question in her mind is how did he get any of these? And so that was the next question she asked me is like, how did you get these? And she's like, my friends helped me. And so
They were on top of this shelf.
yeah, they were all on a shelf that I had no access to and couldn't reach.
That would freak me out too.
Yeah. So she got terrified and was like, you need to go to bed, and like grabbed them all and like put them away. I was like, go to bed now. And that was that night. Um, but as I had mentioned, how sometimes I felt like the stuffed animals had some kind of a way of communicating with me, or that I was always imagining stuffed animals having a way of communicating with me, whatever it was. I definitely remember being almost like attacked myself at one point in the house. And this was really right before one of the last moments that occurred. But
Sorry,
I was,
hold on. Just
yeah,
going back to that. So, did you when you said you told her that your friend helped you or your friends helped you to get them? Do you know what you meant by that, or you don't
no,
recall the actual?
like I said, I actually don't recall. I don't remember this experience happening. And I think that's why if you think about trauma and how that might lead to us having a memory, this might not have been a traumatic experience for me. When I say friends, I could have very well meant like I was having a good time. And so I did not actually recall this happening. The next experiences that happen, I do because they were terrifying. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
and that was what I was getting into is I was actually in the middle of broad daylight one day. I was walking around the house and I got pushed and I fell like flat on my face and started bleeding as a little kid. And I started crying and my mom's like, what happened? What happened? And my dad's like, oh, he just tripped. And I was like, no, like something pushed me. And there was that doll that I had that I was so afraid of that was just staring at me. It was just sitting on the floor in this room and I was convinced that like there was something to do with that particular doll that drove me crazy. I forced
Wow.
my parents to throw it away. I begged them to because they wouldn't get rid of it when I first told them I was afraid of it. After that moment, I was like, you've got to get rid of this doll. And it was actually the little buddy, my little buddy, which is actually the doll that's from like the Child's Play series of movies, which
Oh,
is kind of
no way.
in and of itself like a little bit strange that that was the particular doll. And like, I don't think I knew anything about that movie at the time,
Why
but
would
yeah,
someone get that for you?
I don't know. And it wasn't that actual model. Like they actually had it was like legitimate, like it was a legitimate doll, like a cabinet or something like
Oh,
that.
I didn't know that. It was like a whole
I
line of dolls.
I thought it was terrifying. Um, so yeah, anyway, that happened, and that wasn't the end of our time at that house, but that was my last memory there. The reason we left that house is due to what I would consider a poltergeist incident, and probably what had happening in that house the entire time. But what happened to my mom was one of the nights that my father was out and on patrol. She was home alone. She was running a bath, and there were a couple of lights on in the house, like probably from the kitchen all the way through the living room and into her bedroom. There was like a hallway light. And the way that she told me what happened was that she all of a sudden saw the light go off, like from her bedroom, but like around the corner and into like the kitchen light. And so she was like, oh man. And so she started to think that somebody was in the house at first for whatever reason, but she wasn't hearing anything. So she worked up the nerve to walk all the way to the kitchen and just see if anything was wrong. And she puts the light back on. No one's around. She even says out loud, you know, my husband's a police officer and he's on his way back. So if anybody's trying to rob us, like, you better leave now, kind of a deal, trying to threaten or scare them away. And then she's like, okay, well, I'm just going to go back into my bathroom. And on her way back into her bathroom, the light in her bathroom goes off before she gets there. And at this point, she's like, oh my God, like maybe something moved past me. So she's like screams again, like, you need to leave. And she doesn't hear anything. And at this point, she's realizing, like, okay, this is odd. Maybe it's an electrical failure and like parts of the wiring of this house, which is very old, were going bad. So she walks into the bathroom, turns that light back on, and then the living room light, which she can see because like the way that her bedroom and bathroom are set up is that there's a hallway, but there's a doorway from her bedroom into the hallway, which is followed by another doorway that's parallel to that into the living room. So she sees the living room light go off at this point, and she walks back out there, and right when she gets to the hallway, all of the lights start going on and off in the house, and the actual switches were physically moving up and down.
Wow.
That was what really was the final nail in the coffin for her, is that when she realized, and her brain immediately processed, this isn't electrical and nobody's here, and we have to get out of this house. So she ran into my bedroom and grabbed me. I was actually not talking to dolls at the time, so she grabs me and brings me into the car, grabs a couple pairs of clothes, and we left, and we drove all the way to Georgia that night and just never went back. So
Oh.
my stepdad still had no idea what really happened because he didn't experience that himself, and he's never really been into any of this kind of stuff. So like for
Mm.
him, he was just like, I don't know what to say, but I guess we're selling this house. So
So this was so I mean, even was he ever there present when some of this stuff would happen and he wouldn't experience it?
yeah, yeah, that happened when the doll situation, when I tripped or I fell or got pushed, whichever way you want to run with that. But you know, that was his take on it. Was like, oh, I must have tripped because I wasn't paying attention. I felt like I was forcefully pushed. And I remember that because like that's again, it's like a very traumatic experience for me. And I blamed the doll, you know, so that was kind of what happened there. But he never really experienced that now.
And yeah, in terms of anything that was more, visually or otherwise objectively apparently happening to your mom, for example. Was there any case where that happened and he did not experience it?
Everything that I talked about, he wasn't present for,
Okay.
except for the one moment, right? So when the fireplace incident happened, he was gone and my mom's friend was there.
Mm.
When the doll thing happened, he may have been in bed asleep, but he also could have easily been on patrol because he did work the night shift. So it's very likely that a lot of these things happened when he wasn't in the house.
Do you think there's something to that? Maybe something related to his acceptance of these things?
Well, just a very different person. Just didn't really grow up believing in supernatural things. And so with him being out of the house and my mom believing in these things and having experienced them in her life, like maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe his presence would have caused things not to happen. I don't know.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but I think that these experiences after this moment were pretty foundational for me in terms of just where my interests ended up aligning for the rest of my childhood. And so, as you can imagine, going to a library in school, I was obsessed with every book related to paranormal phenomena at that point. I wanted to hear about and read about ghost stories because I wanted to know what was going on in my life. I wanted to hear that I wasn't crazy and that other people had real or true ghost stories and that this wasn't just a thing that happened to me and my family. And so I kind of took solace in all of those, different types of things, and then obviously expanded my horizons and started researching into different topics outside of just paranormal. It was more parapsychological at that point, but yeah, a lot of those experiences really helped curate a profound interest in this topic. But I don't really think I remember anything happening to me again until I was about 8 years old. Um,
And in that period when you became more interested in this stuff, were you discussing this with anyone, friends
mm,
or family?
no, I was always that weird kid. I didn't make friends easily. I always was very nervous, didn't want to be the first one to spark conversation. So
Mm.
I was the weird kid in class who really didn't talk very much. And I remember there was this one time in second grade where I was just lost in my own mind all the time, daydreaming. And so, like, I had this experience where somebody asked me for a particular crayon color, and I'm looking at the box of crayons, and the first thing that goes through my mind is like, if I'm looking at this crayon and they're asking for blue, I know I see blue, but I have no way of knowing if, like, when I hand them this blue crayon, if they actually see the same color as me or they see a different color, but we all use the same language, so they just think that it's the same color. Like maybe they're experiencing green right now, but I have no idea. Which was like, okay, I could have been talking about color blindness, but at the same time, I was like, I don't know if anybody's subjective reality is the same as mine at all. And I'll never be able to know that. And no matter what the expression of my reality is, I don't know that they're going through the same thing. And I'll never be able to know. And like that was going
That's
through my head as a second grade kid when somebody like asked me for
that's so fascinating. I mean, I interviewed a friend of mine, Brett, last week, and she said something very similar, like that from a very early age, she had this understanding that reality was much more subjective.
yeah.
And I was like, there are people today that, you know, are adults and live their whole lives without that realization. So that's
Yeah.
really fascinating. And like for me, I'm actually colorblind, and I didn't even I never thought of that concept until I realized what was wrong with me being colorblind at I think it was not until sixth grade that I realized that. So
Yeah, that's another great point you just brought up though. I didn't know that my vision was so bad that I was technically like I wouldn't say I'm legally blind, but I my field of view is about this much. So if I'm not wearing glasses or contacts, like I shouldn't do anything. And
mm,
I went all the way up till third grade. And when the people did the eye test in my school and realized what my vision was, they were blown away. They were like, "How have you made it this far in school at all?" Like without actually being
oh
able
wow.
to see anything. Because I never really, and I don't know why I never told anybody that I couldn't see things that were on the board. I guess I just thought that everybody was struggling the same amount that I was.
Yeah, that's what I thought about color blindness too. I just thought
Exactly.
something you had to learn and I didn't get it or something.
Yeah.
And wait, so you mentioned there was a military connection with your family, right? Um did so I'm sure you've heard of these stories and connections with military and generational military connections to experiencers. Has that ever come up in your own research of your family or anything like that, like a connection with the military?
Not in the same sense. Not in the same sense at all, because my father was really the first one on my side of, or like really in on my dad's side of the family, at least as far as I know. We really only go up to one tier above him before they immigrated here from Europe. So he's the first one who was really a part of the military, and the part of the military and what he did is very closely tied to this topic. So
Mm,
it has crossed my mind a lot, but not in the same context as like generational military families having experiences.
okay.
When they split, and then moving way forward into the future, there was a moment where in an interaction with a particular being, I think was tied to someone in my family on my mom's side who was in the military, but that's very different.
Okay. And when you were in school at these young ages, were you part of any gifted programs? Because that has come up as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely was. And that started in elementary school, and my experiences never deviated to being recruited to any kind of a psionics program, so I'll get that out of the way first.
Okay.
But I did participate in these programs. The ones that I first partook in, they actually took us and bused us to a different location where it was always kind of weird to me that there was nobody there, but it was like a classroom type of a setting. So there was like computer labs and there were science labs. It was either a college that didn't have classes at that time or a
Mm.
high school where they were maybe on break or something. But there were only the teachers there and the students that were from my elementary school. And that's what I always thought was weird about it. Like, where is everybody else and who uses this on a regular basis? But
Mm.
the computer labs were really just teaching us about computers at a really early age. We gave us full access to like Encarta Encyclopedia. It was like, have at it. And the other part of that was the science. And so we were learning biology and astronomy. It was all really like over my head at that age. And I just remember really enjoying going and being away and getting to hang out on a computer. And that was about the extent of it. I ended up doing it again in fifth grade when I moved to a different school system in a different city,
Mhm.
and they pulled me in, and that one was much more about brain teasers and really intense like logic puzzles. And we did end up going on a field trip to space camp, which was pretty cool. But
Mm.
again, like if they wanted to recruit me, they maybe missed the opportunity, but or maybe I just didn't give them the signs that they were looking for.
Was that because I know like the gate program, which has come up a lot in these stories, that is only active in a handful of states. Do you know if that was in any of the states that you lived at the time?
I believe it was. Yeah.
Okay.
I did try to go back and do research after some of these stories came up, and I do believe that that was the one of the ones I was in.
Okay. Cool. So carry on from elementary
Yeah.
school.
Yeah, so I guess at that point, I've lived a couple more years, and I was always scared of the dark. So I would say that like obviously this fascination might have had a negative impact on me in the sense that like I was always looking over my shoulder, I was always scared, and going to bed was actually terrifying for me. So for many years, I would either have nightmares or I would try to hide under the covers because I was afraid of what I would see. And I don't know if it was paranoia of like seeing faces and things where they weren't really there, with me explaining to you how terrible my vision was. Who knows what manifestations the mind can create with darkness and shadow and
Yeah.
things like that. So, I never really knew how to look back on all those experiences and say that I was constantly haunted or experiencing things. But right around the age of 8 years old, I definitely had what I think was one of my first contact experiences, and it was the first time that I saw a blue entity. So that is something that's been coming up a lot lately, and it's just kind of wild to hear that my experience actually kind of started off with one like that. But I was lying in bed one night, and it was the first time I'd ever experienced sleep paralysis. And I'm the guy, I've argued with people online that sleep paralysis does not always mean an abduction, but I also don't know. I've never really done any kind of like hypnotic regression to see if sleep paralysis experiences I've had other aspects to them that I might not have remembered. But I will tell you that this one was kind of mind blowing in the sense that my brother and we slept on the bunk bed, and I always had the top bunk. And I remember opening my eyes, not being able to move, not being able to scream, and all of the windows and the blinds and the doors were opening and closing and moving and opening and closing and moving. I could hear the shower curtain and visualize. I could actually see the shower curtain from around a corner. Like, so you would have to like go into the bathroom and take a left to be able to actually see it. But I could see it like in my mind's eye that shower curtain was opening and closing. And then my toy box that was like one of those really like Fisher Price toy box that opened and closed like that was going up and down, and that was going up and down. And then the thing that was really wild was that the toys themselves from the toy box were floating up out of the toy box and then like kind of just floating in circles. We had I'll just throw my little brother under the bus. He liked to play with girly things, right? So he had this little pony, and it was going like this, and I was like, "Why is this My Little Pony thing like right in front of me?" And it's just going like this, like hovering, and I can't move. I'm terrified. I don't know what's going on, and like I can't do anything. And eventually, I snap out of it, and everything is back to normal. And I'm just in a cold sweat, and I turn over and look to my side, and as soon as I turn over and I look, our bunk bed is like up against the wall, and I like turn towards the wall, and there's this blue face, like this translucent blue face, bit of an elongated head, but it almost looked like my head, staring right at me with a smile, like just with this really happy smile. And I remember not feeling threatened. I remember not feeling harmed. And I remember it not being a negative. I just didn't think it was a negative entity. That whole experience wasn't particularly negative either, but it was just strange. And it was like, I started to scream immediately now that I could. My parents came rushing in and I told them what happened. And they're just like, you had a dream, you know, and then it was just very easily dismissed as you had a dream. It wasn't until I was significantly older and learned about sleep paralysis to really retrospectively look back and say, whoa, that was the first time I actually went through sleep paralysis. And then it wasn't until the blue beings thing has been talked about recently that I was like, wow, I saw a blue being back then. And it'll come up again later on, very close to what's been happening
Wow.
to me in the last couple of years. But yeah.
How old were you at that time? Wow. Um, yeah, I mean, I personally have had sleep paralysis experiences as well, and I just call them that because that's the general term. And I also agree that they don't all mean abductions. For me, I think based on my experiences and that I've had similar experiences uh, physically and somatically during my contact protocol, which utilizes psilocybin. I think that something has, this is my own theory, like something has to happen to your body physically in order to allow you to access certain states, certain altered states. And that could involve visions or communications or even abductions.
Yeah.
That's just my take on it. Mine, unfortunately, were pretty horrifying and negative.
Yeah.
It involved some very scary entities that did not feel great at all for me. But yeah, that's really fascinating that yours was not.
I've only had that one and then one other that were not. And every other one has been like a horror movie coming to life. And
Wow.
it didn't pick up again until I was probably in my very early 20s. And I had been living by myself for the first time, had a really cool job, and um, was just not really in a good place though. Like maybe I was doing well in some aspects from the outside looking in, but inside I was not. I was struggling. I was not the best version of myself. I was prioritizing the wrong things in life. And at this time, I couldn't even go to bed. I was afraid to go to bed because every time I would even start to slip into the hypnagogic state, I would start to hear knock, knock, knock,
Mm,
footstep, 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 voices whispering in my ears, and they were
wow.
terrifying. I mean, to the point at which I would feel things start to touch me, start to grab me, start to sit on my bed next to me. And you couldn't even like it was invisible at times, and sometimes they were visible. And the classic succubus experience people talk about, saw it face to face. It screamed at me like from beside me in my bed, was disgusting looking, disheveled, like old hag, kind of a head, long white hair, the sagging breasts, all of that, like the stereotypical classic version of a succubus. Like I was face to face with that thing, and there was like a troll, kind of of an entity that was like stomping through my hallways. Like it had a big club and broad shoulders. And like again, it's
Wow.
interesting about sleep paralysis. It's like you don't have to see around the corner to see around the corner. And that's what I like going back to that experience I had when I was 8 years old, saying like I could see my shower curtain, but there's no way I really should have been able to see my shower curtain. I
Yeah.
could see the thing walking down the hallway, even though I'm like paralyzed in my bed. And then if you've seen the
No,
scene
I think
from
it's similar to out of body experiences. That's I mean,
yeah,
the one time I almost had one purposely induced during a meditation, using the gateway process, which we'll get into later. I felt like sleep paralysis coming on to my physical body, and as I felt like my consciousness starting to lift out, and it freaked me out, and I lost it because I
yeah,
associated that with the negative things. But I do
absolutely.
think things are connected in that way. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think? I mean, for me, when I had my negative experiences with them, I was also going through a period of my life in my early 20s, early and mid 20s, where I was feeling a lot of shame and guilt about things that I was doing, like
Yeah.
growing up in a very conservative household, and I had a girlfriend, and we had this like hidden sexual part of our relationship that was always kind of this shadow within me, and I felt somehow that was connected to the experiences.
I think you
Not to say
nailed
that
it.
they yeah, not to say that the experiences aren't real. I just think that, in my opinion, something about the shadow and the subjective can manifest in these more objective experiences.
I would have to agree with you 100%. I think that that's probably pretty spot on. And the way I would look at it, like the the Hawkins map of consciousness, and you think grief, fear, shame, guilt, apathy, even all of these lower level consciousness aspects. If you're operating from those paradigms on a consistent, daily, regular basis, then like yeah, I mean, maybe you are not, I wouldn't even use the word like, oh, you're attracting this stuff to you. It's like, that's your perspective. That's your reality.
Yep.
That is going to be your experience. And so, yeah, I would say that's exactly what happened to me. And it was a struggle to kind of break out of that. And when I changed my life and I prioritized the right things again, everything started to go away. And one of the last moments that I had sleep paralysis, I actually had, I was like, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening again. I wasn't even at my house. I was at a friend's house. And all of a sudden, it's like a cloud with a little cat on it, with holding a bell and like waving at me. And it just like kind of floated by. And I tell people that story and they're just like, oh yeah, those are the demons like wishing you good luck and farewell. And I was like, I guess so. I guess so. But that's like that was just like the way that you can see such a split between what those experiences can be. And to your
Yeah.
point, it could be a portal to an out of body experience in and of itself. The one time I had a very solid astral projection, it happened because I came out of a lucid dream, got hit with sleep paralysis, and then got out of bed and like didn't realize that I was in my astral body. I walked into the bathroom and I looked at myself, and people report different things when they look into a mirror. Some people see themselves or their astral body. I didn't see anything. And I was like, wait a second. I'm looking in the mirror and there's nothing there. Like this doesn't make any sense. So I like walk back and I look into the living room and I see my family and the dogs and like my little sister was like in the kitchen and my mom was on the couch. And I like go back and I look into my room and as soon as I turn, I see myself lying in bed. And I'm like, no way. And as soon as I see myself lying in bed, I'm now lying in my bed and I'm looking straight up at the ceiling and I see this black squiggly like outline of a body. And I also am looking down at my body and I realize now like maybe I'm this thing and this is the same thing. And all of a sudden this black squiggliness like comes into my mouth through my mouth. Like it like merges with me and the vibrations I've like if you do astral projection at all, everybody talks about that vibratory state of intensity. Like I experienced that extreme vibration, and I thought a demon had entered my body. So
Yep.
like that was the kind of crazy thing. Well, one other thing that was interesting is that was there was an entity encounter in this moment. I looked under my bed at one point,
While you
and
were in the astral body.
so like right before I got like kicked out of that experience and then forced back into my body because it didn't feel like I intended that at all. I like looked under the covers of my bed, but I felt this urge to do it, like something wanted me to look under the covers. And when I lifted up and looked under the bed, I actually don't think they were covers. I think I just had to like put my head down there. There was this very large, wide grin, pointy teeth, almost like a two-dimensional character. Like didn't look almost it,
Mm.
like it really looked like an anime kind of a character. And it had huge red eyes and like pink hair, and it was just staring at me, like so excited that I found it. Like it was playing a game of hide and seek with me or something. It looked terrifying, but I wasn't like that scared. It wasn't like the sleep paralysis monsters we were talking about. Like this was just some crazy entity. And sure enough, years and years later, I'm on Reddit just scrolling through experiencers one day, and somebody's like, "Oh, have you seen this like short little entity with like a big wide grin and pointy teeth?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I have. I don't know what that thing is, but I think what they said is that there are these entities that are like yay high that will try and like help pull you out of your body to have an astral projection or out of body experience." And I was like, "There's no way. Like that's
Wow.
too wild." But yeah, that's what I traced it back to.
Oh, that's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, so that was an interesting time in my life. That's when things really started to I was probably a couple of years later now. I like get into my high school years, and I get to the point where I've got a really robust friend group. Everybody like I kind of like came out of my shell junior year going into senior year. And at that point I was telling my stories to all my friends, right? And so a lot of my friends just gave me crap because we grew up in a very religious area, and that kind of created the opposite effect in a lot of people where they just tried to push themselves away from that. So I had a lot of very atheist and agnostic friends that weren't very religious, weren't very spiritual, thought life was just random chaos and
And
very
so,
scientists.
what about you and your upbringing? What was that in terms of spirituality?
Um, I would say I was always very agnostic. There was a bit of time where I was going through that rough patch in my life where I was probably more atheist than anything, and I kind of discarded my belief in the spiritual stuff, but mainly because I went through so much trying to prove things to everybody, and then it got out of hand. And yeah, so I was always very spiritually open, but never really subscribed to a particular belief system.
Okay.
Everybody around me was Catholic and Baptist, and being in an area where there were so many different denominations and everybody had slight variations of what they believed, it made it really difficult for me to even believe that any of that could be true at all. Because, like, how can every single one of you have a completely different perspective on a virtually almost the same thing? It just seems very hypocritical, and everybody thought that they were right and was very dogmatic about it. And if that weren't the case, and people were very open and like not always trying to say that their way was the right way, it would have been easier to maybe fall into belief around some religion. But I also struggled and fell into the same trap a lot of people do with religion, where you're like, well, how could a God be cruel and allow any cruelty? Why can't this all be perfect and happy and harmony all the time? Which now I have a very different perspective. It's like, we have to embrace and accept that suffering and negativity and all this stuff and duality is actually a part of the process that gives us the free will to choose to be better and then grow from that, right? So like
Yeah.
you'll get there eventually, but yeah, very immature perspective on religion probably
Yeah.
kept me away from it for a really long time.
Okay.
But yeah, as I was getting to, I say senior year of high school, I was going to parties a lot, and at this time, I was like, oh, what better way to try and prove that this stuff is real than to grab a Ouija and start dabbling into communication with spirits, and to do so in a very unprotected way because I didn't know anything about white magic. I didn't do my research at all really before getting into this. I just thought my mom always wanted me to avoid using it. We had one growing up, but like we never touched it, but it always was there. And my brother and I would always like eye it, and then we were never allowed to play with it. And my mom would always tell babysitters, and I think that's why these topics came up with babysitters, by the way, because I'd always ask them if we could use the board when my mom
Oh, okay.
was. And they always knew that my mom was like, no, don't. If they ask you, don't let them do it. Which just begs the question why she kept it around for so long.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting.
anyway, that did lead to like one babysitter eventually telling me a story about, and this is interesting. So I was doing this weird thing as a kid where like I would stare into space, not space, but like just stare into any area in front of me until it would fade away and turn completely white. And so I would like, I didn't realize at the time this was a form of meditation, but I would do this and then try to interact and engage in this space if I could. And sometimes I like heard things, and sometimes I felt like I saw like shadows moving around. And I never did much more than that, but I had this babysitter who came through, and I told her about that. And this is the same one who I told about that story of where I saw the being. And she was like very accepting and open and spiritual. So she told me a little bit more about herself. And she was like, "Oh, yeah, I believe in angels too." And told me this story about how she was in a car accident. And when she was in a car accident, she got surrounded by this white bubble, and everything around her was spinning, like the debris from the car and everything. And she's moving along with it. And as soon as it all settles, she like is released from the bubble and she's there and
Wow.
just gets out of the car completely unscathed.
Wow.
And that's a story I've never forgotten because it was just so profound. But
Huh.
yeah, if it's on the
Amazing.
subject of babysitters, but yeah, as I was getting to the story with the Ouija boards
Yeah.
and going around to all these different parties and pulling it out, I was very specific about the groups of people that I was doing this with. So I wasn't like pulling this out at a party. When I say party, I'm not talking about a project type of experience. I'm talking just like a core group of friends that were open-minded enough to try, but then skeptical when anything happened, which kind of defeated the purpose. So we would have these experiences where it would spell out a name and it might be a name related to somebody there, and they're like, "Holy crap, like nobody here should know that except for me, and I didn't do that." So that is a little bit weird, and they'd get a little bit freaked out.
Mm.
Um, and then there was a moment where I was with a small group, and the
And
planchette of like
sorry. So in these practices, did you have any sort of intentionality behind it, or was it just to try to prove that something is happening?
very ego driven,
Okay.
try to prove to people thing. Yeah, I would say I was operating from a place of just trying to communicate with whatever was willing to communicate, and I wasn't thinking at all about what was really on the other side of that connection. I assumed, I guess, that there was nothing that was going to really happen or go wrong, and I don't mean nothing happened as in the experience wouldn't occur, but then I didn't think about ramifications. I didn't think about a hitchhiker effect. I didn't think about people becoming
Sure.
possessed or anything like that. Um, and that's just a just a big oversight on my side. I should have been more prepared. But again, I'm like 15, 16 years old at this time. Those
Yeah.
aren't the first things going through my head.
We have a
Um,
lot of oversights at that age.
so yeah, I would say that those experiences were pretty intense. One of the more intense ones was when there were about four of us sitting there, and the planchette's kind of moving in a circle. It's not settling on any letter, and all of us are kind of looking at each other, and everybody like one guy's like rolling his eyes, and then all of a sudden like it's moving in one direction, and then it flies like into the wall at full speed at a force that didn't make sense because everybody's hand was like almost still in place like when this happened, and we're all just like, what just happened? And so something really intense had just occurred in that moment, and everybody was done at that point. So even the skeptical people were like, we're not messing with this anymore." And as the person who was really responsible for bringing it there and knowing that I wasn't doing anything, and knowing that even the skeptical people were now like, "You need to put this away," that kind of gave me the validation I was looking for. But I guess that's not really how I should have gone about it, right?
Yeah.
So I will say at this time, things with my family started to get really bad. Relationship wise, everything was kind of falling apart. Arguments were happening all the time. Nobody was seeing eye to eye. And we were starting to experience poltergeist activity at my house. So we had built this house from scratch. This was not an old home in a rural area, it was suburban, I would say. And we had three dogs that were Shar Peis. So these dogs are awesome because in like Chinese lore, they're really guard dogs that help protect you from negative spirits.
Mm.
Well, they were going nuts on a regular basis, barking at things that nobody was able to see, and they were dogs that were like always very playful and happy with each other. And we saw their behavior change and reach a point where they were on edge, on guard, really all the time. And at the same time, nobody was sleeping well. People were having weird like nightmares in their dreams, and it really started to manifest in a way nobody could ignore when like we had pictures fly off the wall like in our living room. And this is the same house I told you I had that astral projection experience in, where I had that
Yeah.
paralysis out of a lucid dream kind of a thing happen. But when we're sitting in the living room watching TV, and we had these they're kind of like the floating shelves,
Yep.
and we had little family photos on them. In the middle of the day, just broad daylight, photo just flies off, lands on the floor, breaks, have to clean up glass, like that kind of thing. And as I said, the relationship with my mom wasn't really going well. So I moved out very temporarily. It's probably about 2 week period of time. Moved in with my grandparents, took my Ouija board with me. And at the time, I still had two friends that I was like still trying to hang out with and do the Ouija board stuff for whatever reason. And we would drive off. Like I told my parents we were going to get like McFlurries from McDonald's or something, and we'd actually sneak away to use the Ouija board from the car in a parking lot. And like that's how weirdly obsessed we were with like
Yeah.
doing this. And and this is where it got really scary for the last two people who were doing this with me. And we were trying to say goodbye to whatever was going on. And it wouldn't spell goodbye out. It went to six and then six and then six. And these two guys were probably the two guys that were like most mentally strong, not really believers, kind of skeptical, but had hung on with me because they kind of thought this was real. And they didn't, it was challenging them in a way that they were still more curious than anything. But when that happened, particularly, I saw the look in their faces go from like just being here and doing it to like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to have any part in this ever again. And so one of those two guys was done with it for good. And then the other guy came to me a couple of weeks later and was like, "Hey, we need to pull it back out one more time and try to say goodbye officially." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, I'm not going to get into it, but if you could just meet me here like tomorrow so we can really do this. I've just got to do this for myself." And I was like, "Dude, you can tell me like what's going on. Is anything wrong?" And he's like, "I'm not going to talk about it." And that blew me away because this is one of the people who believed that the idiosyncratic motor explanation of this all being subconscious moving it. Like he was the one who proposed that idea and told me that it was all fake and that it was all subconscious. And he was like, "Hey, I can't tell you why, but now we need to meet up and we've got to get rid of this thing officially." Right. So I thought that that was pretty strange, but that culminated with me eventually going to my grandparents' house after I moved out. And I still brought that with me and I tried to use it on my own. And it was working. And this was like, I had never considered doing it on my own until basically no one else was interested in doing it anymore. And I was at a place where I was like, "Oh, what am I communicating with?" And it spelled out saints. So I'm sitting here having this conversation one day and it spells out saints. And I'm like, okay, great. Like I'm obviously communicating with a really positive entity, but I was trying to communicate with a specific entity. And I thought I was trying to communicate with the spirit of like the law. Like there was a woman who passed away in my grandparents' house. And so I was trying to communicate with her and it spelled out saints. And so I felt comfortable. That changed very quickly. I remember the night that that happened, everything got terrible. I felt like I was being stalked, like I was a prey, like I was prey and there was a predator in this house. The amount of fear and overwhelming fear out of nowhere with no other thoughts in my mind at all that I could really associate with it was so intense that I was unable to sleep. I was just shaking in bed. I was hiding under the covers. For hours, I was just sitting there feeling terrified that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip and go to sleep so it could mess with me. And it was already messing with me clearly because these patterns of fear and these patterns of negative thoughts that were spiraling and uncontrollable were the manifestation of this thing. And so if I think now about like what has happened in my life is that I went from being kind of extroverted for the first time ever to losing all my friends, not necessarily, but like at this moment in time, like I wasn't really hanging out with anybody. I was only focused on that my family life fell apart. And now I'm feeling these cycles of overwhelming fear. And what happened was that night, one of these nights, it culminated with me not even feeling like I could go into my own bathroom. I like went to the downstairs bathroom for whatever reason. And as I'm walking into this bathroom, I hear a noise in the kitchen and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And all of my grandparents' mail, and they didn't have any pets, so this is really, really interesting. But all of their mail was sitting in like a classic kind of a mail holder. And this is like midnight, scattered all across the floor of their kitchen. And I was like, oh my God, there is something here. Like I'm screwed. And so I go to the bathroom. I'm terrified. I don't even know if I how to like get out of the bathroom. So I come out of the bathroom and I go into the kitchen to pick up all the mail and I put it away. And as I'm like walking back around the corner, there is there's a couch that like with the arm of the couch that's kind of adjacent to the opening of the doorway. And there is a head that just kind of turns and looks at me. And it's kind of a translucent, disfigured, kind of creepy looking head. And I book it upstairs. I book it into my room. I close the door. I'm panicking. I'm in a cold sweat. I don't know what to do. I basically just experienced like all this overwhelming anxiety and fear, the mail being scattered all across the floor, this now entity that is there clearly showing itself to me. And this all happened after it told me it was a saint. So I'm like, great. Um, so my mom calls me and I call her or whatever and I try to apologize and she's like, hey, she's like, I just need to let you know, I just called a psychic and she's gonna come over to the house and she's gonna do a sage technique and cleanse the house. But as soon as I picked up the phone and talked to her, you know what she said to me? And I was like, what? She's like, you need to tell your son to stop playing with the Ouija board. And I was like,
Wow.
what? And so it's like she didn't really know. She might have known, but like she didn't know that I was this deep in it and that I was doing this consistently. Um, so yeah, like that happened. The psychic came through. She cleansed our house. I got rid of the Ouija board. I moved back in, and things actually did go back to normal after that. So I think that it's probably like a low level entity of some kind that was just messing around with somebody who was very naive and very open and didn't know what they were doing. But things didn't actually go back to normal. I thought that they did. And what happened next was I started to get sick. I go into my senior year of high school and I suddenly break down with a feverish cold and I go to the doctor and at the time they thought it was mono. So they treated it as um or we thought it might be mono, but they treated it as bronchitis because I didn't test positive for mono. So they were like, okay, well maybe you've got this is the next closest thing, so we treat you for this. And then what happened is that I kind of got better, but a couple weeks later I got sick with the same intensity. And if you've ever been sick with mono, it's something people usually only get one time, and it is very intense. It's like a very type A flu kind of an experience, but once you get it, you don't really get it again. You carry Epstein-Barr with you forever, which is EBV. That's the strain, but it doesn't ever activate again for most people.
Mm.
So it was a little bit strange that I was that sick again. So I missed a little bit of school, and then I got sick. I got over it, but then I got sick again 2 weeks later with the exact same thing. And it was extremely intense. And again, I go to the doctor. This time my mom is like, hey, this is a little bit abnormal. And I go to a doctor and they try to prescribe medicine to help with the symptoms. And of course, that works only a little bit. But I got sick again the following week. And I progressively got worse to the point which I was now sick every single week. I couldn't really get out of bed. Um, and there was nothing that was going on. And so my mom at this point is like, we've got to open up and try and see specialists. We've got to do blood work. We've got to do all kinds of things to figure out what's going on with you. And of course, I felt like a guinea pig for the next month of my life. I can't tell you how many vials of blood I had to give to how many doctors and specialists, but probably could have had a private blood bank. It was that intense.
Wow.
And nothing came of it. Nothing at all ever came of it. There was never any diagnosis that anybody could give me, and I ended up actually being placed on what they called homebound at the time. I wasn't allowed to go back to school at this point. I finally had a doctor's permission to have all of my final, whatever I needed to finish out, handled by one person who worked with me in the school to ensure that I could really finish out my senior year. But that was a huge blow because I didn't get to finish out my senior year with all my friends, and I couldn't really hang out with all my friends. And everybody in the school tried to rally around supporting me because it's not really often that a kid ends up homebound for being sick so much. So my speech and debate team really stepped up to the plate and they helped me out. And people were making food for my family and dropping it off, but I was suffering. I was developing chronic fatigue syndrome as a result. So that's where like even when you sleep, you don't get sleep. It was like your energy, something was constantly draining my energy nonstop at all times, and that was tough. I continued to kind of live through this and suffer until I finally decided that like I needed to look into white magic type protective spells and things like that. And the psychic was the one who had kind of planted that in my brain, but I didn't act on it. And then months later, I'm like, maybe I should give this some thought. I never communicated with a spirit guide, never tried to communicate with a spirit guide. So when I tell you about naive, like getting into diving off the deep end without protection, like it's like going into the middle of the ocean without scuba gear and trying to go to the bottom. Like I feel like that's kind of what I tried to do to myself. Um, and I drowned, right? Like that's the ultimate way of metaphorically representing what happened to me. It's like I drowned in the darkness of whatever is out there. And eventually I started to have these guide communication attempts and I got names from guides. And one of them mentioned that its name was David. And
How
it,
do you mind sharing how you initiated this?
it was basically telepathic communication. I kind of skipped over a part where I was at a I had a friend at the time who I tried this with who was very open minded where I would sit down and I wanted to learn if telepathy was real. And so I found a guide that kind of talked to us about how to go about telepathy. And the guide basically was just explaining that two people have to be open, they have to give conscious permission to each other to be able to share in this kind of an experience. And that we would sit there and yeah, so it was a technique of telepathic communication where two people give each other permission to kind of share information through um, telepathy and I guess at the time kind of learning about like the biofield and how even our heartbeat is kind of like pulsating and creating that field around us. We visualized that field and we would hold our hands kind of close together but not touching and kind of imagine that there was a stream of light between each of our third eyes that was connected and it was like this bright golden light. And then we would just play a guessing game. It would be like guess the number like 1 through 10 and we were getting it right. It was very accurate. And then we tried to escalate to doing this with like pictures and words and symbols. And we would have things like I think of a red balloon, and like she would get it, and I was like, oh my god, like it's just wild. So yeah, those were the kind of ways that I learned telepathy, and I just instinctively felt like I could do this to communicate with guides. So whatever that same process was, I just kind of imagined like kind of a light coming out of my third eye, but also communicating in words outwardly.
Mhm.
And I ended up getting, yeah, the name David came back, and I had the urge to get a notebook and grab a pen and kind of write down some things. And it was actually kind of, I wouldn't call it automatic writing, I would call it automatic drawing. I decided I would, I don't know why I decided to do this, but I grabbed a pen and I grabbed a notebook and I ended up drawing what looked like a beret with like an eagle on it. And then I got this impression that candy was important and I needed to tell my grandmother all of these three things. So I had David, I had this hat with an eagle on it, and I knew candy was important. So I went to my grandma and I was like, hey, this is going to sound really crazy, but do these things mean anything to you? And she was like, she was floored. She was like, your uncle David was in the military and he always loved giving me candy. And I was like, okay, well, I think he just helped me out of a pickle because he was the one who I actually called to like kind of help cleanse me of everything that was going on and try and help me get over all this stuff. And my grandma pulls out a photo of him, and sure enough, he's like wearing a freaking hat that has that like insignia on it or whatever. And I can't remember what branch of the military he was with. It may have been Air Force, but
Wow.
But yeah, it was just wild to me that like I got a name that was so highly specific. I got like one word that I knew I could use to tell her, and I knew to tell her that like it wasn't for anybody else. That message was just hers,
Wow.
and it resonated with her. And then she had a story behind it, and it matched. And so it was definitely the confirmation after all the shit that I had been through that finally brought me to believe like, yeah, there's got to be more to this. But at the same time, given the circumstances and what I had just gone through, I was terrified of doing anything more. I felt like it was good enough to kind of have learned all of this, but I wanted to shut myself off from the spirit realm or being any way adjacently connected to it. And so I really closed that door. And I think that in my early 20s and late 20s beyond that, I might have been more focused on the spirituality side of things and understanding reality a bit more did I ever really care about stuff. That the paranormal side of things honestly was a roller coaster ride, left me a bit jaded. And that's a pretty good segue into, some of the different types of experiences that I had in altered states of consciousness. And that's when I started to I really started to take those routes to exploring other things than trying to do it with Ouija boards. So
So we will end there for now. We will split this up into two parts. Thanks for joining me, Mitch. And stay tuned because this will turn into a more positive and uplifting story. And it will show, how these journeys tend to go for a lot of experiencers. I think if they stick with this and really show how much of a greater reality is out there and within reach if pursued in the right way. And I think there is a good way to do this. So hopefully Mitch's story can resonate with some people out there and be helpful. Please like and subscribe to our show and leave any comments, any questions. And yeah, we'll continue this in part 2. Thank you.